Hi everybody, Doug Adams to talk about all things running with you. In a previous blog we introduced RPE, or rate of perceived exertion. And that was a good intro to it, and we hope that you've started thinking about it and started practicing it and using it as well if you're using the app or another way of measuring your training load. Now we want to talk about how we specifically use it with acute to chronic workload ratios and why this has been a big success. I'll tell you, I've been using this when we were beta testing things for the app, and it really did help me where I was running and I was purposely trying to increase my volume and my intensity a bit, getting ready for a trail race I have coming up. So I use the acute to chronic workload ratios, and to the point where it actually was pretty accurate. I was surprised because, you see I've got two watches on. I'm a big data guy. I'm using those things all the time. I actually found that the number, as soon as I was in the red category, which I'll explain later, I actually did start to notice a little pain on my runs. I had a little shin pain, which is a pretty volume-based injury there. So, and then when the ratio was in the green and yellow, I felt much better on my runs, and I was trying to blind myself a little bit to it, but it's a really powerful tool that if you're looking to increase your running or up your training a bit, it's very helpful to keep you healthy with it. So let's go in and talk a little bit more about that now. So applying RPE. If training load, this was a pretty a great article if you haven't read it in JOSPT, moving beyond weekly distance. So again, what we talked about in the last load, not just using external load factors, but talking about external and internal loads combined so that we can quantify training load better. And if it's so important, why can't we really define it, right? That's a lot of the argument and why we have kind of a lack of consensus in the literature that's limiting us from really understanding running injuries better. So if we look at a follow-up article that came up by a different group, but in the same journal, JOSPT, we saw that they were talking a little bit more about this acute to chronic workload ratios as a whole. And in the previous article I showed that was one of their suggestions for ways to quantify this. And what we see is that it's a growing validated way to measure training load. So yeah, and maybe to clarify, it's to quantify or to use training load. We use something called Session RPE, which I'll explain in a little bit, as a way to do a measurement, but then we use a ratio that is looking at what we've been doing in the past 7 days, kind of a rolling average or rolling sum of the past 28 days, and comparing it to the previous 28 days ahead of that. And so like a average weekly volume for the 4 weeks preceding this last week that you're in. And when this study looked at it and they aggregated some data across studies, they showed that a 50% association between acute to chronic workload ratios and health problems when they were comparing the 7-day rolling average versus the average for the 4 weeks preceding that. There's also a little bit more of that where you can wait the last 2 or 3 days to be more beneficial, but I think that there's some challenges in doing that, and it's something to keep an eye on. But basically what we see with this is that you're taking the training load, to put it in a formula here, of the last 7 days, which we calculate with Session RPE. So you go for a run, it's 60 minutes long, and you rate it as a 4 out of 10 intensity because it's an easy run. Then you say that is your 240 points for the day. Then you add up all the points for the last 7 days and divide that by that average 7-day period for the preceding 4 weeks. And if you think about this, this really makes sense because I give a practical example when I explain this to people. Let's say that you're starting to run and you're starting from scratch. So, week 1, 0 training load, okay? Then you get started and you run maybe 10 miles that week, right? Not that big a deal. You jump to 12 the next week, then you're up to 15 the week after that, and then you finally do about 18 miles. So, that's not that big a deal going from 10 to 12 to 18, but if you consider that 0 miles was only a few weeks ago, and you take the average of those weeks leading up to it, it really is a big jump, much more than a lot of people talk about the 10% rule. Well, that's why the 10% rule doesn't work in all situations. If somebody is very consistent with their training and they're going about their day-to-day activities and they're in a pretty set routine, then yeah, increasing 10% is fair for them. But if they're in a training cycle where they're increasing volumes or intensities, or if they're doing things differently, that might not be a good thing, because we know that most running injuries have a 4 to 6 week delay, and it might be because of some of this cumulative effect that we're not taking into consideration when we do something like a 10% and we're looking too short of a period before. So now, how do we use this information and how we measure it? There's a sweet spot that is found in the literature where if you're 80 to 120% of that 4-week average from before, your injury rates are actually lower, where you're less likely to get injured. So we put that, and we have this in our app, the RunDNA app, and we display it on the dashboard for the runner. And we show that they're in the green when they are in that we put it at the like 90 to 110 range is the green. When you're on the border of like 111 to 119, or on the low end, if you're on the 80 to 89, where you're doing too little or too much volume there, we put it as yellow. And then when you're over that, we put it as red, that you're either over or under training. And even if you're under training, like if you taper too much, you might be at risk for injury. So this is a really good guide to help you with changes in volume to make sure that you're not ramping up or down too quickly. That could cause you to have a higher chance of getting injured. So we look at these and express it as a percentage using that Session RPE. So each time you run, you rate your run, how hard it was, and then you go ahead and the app will track it for you. You can create a simple spreadsheet if you're not using the app to do some of this for you here. If you're a data junkie and willing to put that in and track it yourself. But we have the green, yellow, and red categories that should give you some feedback about, hey, maybe it's not time to push today. Maybe I need to back off and let my body adapt more. Because like we said previously, that all exercise is oriented at trying to elicit a positive adaptation, and the recovery is an essential part of that. So this acute to chronic workload ratio is a great way to simply quantify how much you've been doing in the recent time compared to the previous period that might put you at risk for injury. So again, this is the scale looking at that, and we really encourage you to just become familiar with this scale and see basically zone 1 and 2 is a 1 to 4 on the scale. This is how we interpret it. Zone 3 for high aerobic running is going to be a 5 to 6 on the RPE scale. Threshold, zone 4, is going to be 7 to 8 on the RPE scale. And then anaerobic and VO2 max is around that 9 to 10 RPE scale. That's kind of max effort or very hard effort when you're doing those things. So that's just the scale again. And we really want you to start thinking about using this. It's something that is good to have just consistently, but especially if you're returning to running, changing your volume or intensity, whether you're training for a marathon, this is a great thing, or you're training even for 5K, or for a fitness test for the military. It's a great way to look at it so that you're not ramping up too soon. I think you'll see that the theme of the results will be that you have to take a little longer to ramp up, especially when you're first getting started, which is really a dangerous time for runners. So give yourself a little more time. Even doing a little bit for a long time and ramping up slowly will help to reduce your injury risk. Reviewing what worked well, what didn't. I think that it's really important to look back on this in time and look at your good race performances and even your bad race performances to tell, what really went well, what were my weeks like preceding this, how did that really go, and how did that help me out preceding that. Now, there is a little bit of a limitation with this. And the limitation is that you need enough data to really get some of it. So you can do a little bit in your head if you're just starting to use the app. We need 4 to 5 weeks of data on the app before we can start really getting a solid idea of these numbers being very accurate. So if you're just getting started, take it with a grain of salt. But if you have that historical data, it's really helpful. You can even go back if you just started doing this. This is about the end of April in 2021. It's a new feature that was just added. If you're watching this around that time, you can even go back on your calendar in the app and update the RPE from previous one. We put a default in for any previous of about 5 on the RPE scale. So if you need to go back, update those, and that'll help you to change some of those. But that's the biggest limitation, that you need to be patient and have some data before it really is accurate. So hopefully you can use this and start integrating that in sooner rather than later, so that you can start using the number. And if you want to do this, just bring this full screen again so you can see if you're a coach, teach your runners how to do this, or if you're a runner, check this out. You'll just click on your name on the top right of the app, and then click on integrations. And if you have a Garmin GPS, you can just sign into your Garmin Connect, and then you'll start to see that everything integrates in, and you can start to see a lot more data as you're using this. So something that we're really always constantly trying to help people to be their best and run without injuries and really enjoy running. So this is a great way to really start doing this. It's easy. It doesn't require any highly sophisticated technology. Most of us already have a Garmin. You just have to rate yourself and use this acute to chronic workload ratio. So hopefully you enjoy that. If you have questions, please reach out to us. Let us know. We'd love to clarify and answer any of those, and let us know how it's helping you.